So let's turn away from the anti-feminism component of red pill rhetoric and turn our attention towards the gender determinism that they often argue for, be it biological determinism or evolutionary psychology. Now, before we look at what red pillers have to say, we have to address two things. One being a flaw inherent to attempts at understanding social phenomena through biology and evolution, and two being a flaw that manifests itself frequently in red pill rhetoric. The first problem is that evolutionary psychology is kind of complete nonsense. The whole notion of biotruths stems from a long history of scientists trying to understand how our society constructs itself by displacing it onto biology. If, for example, we ask the question, how does testosterone influence gender norms in our society? We presuppose from the question that testosterone has an influence. If we start from this starting point, we've already bought into societal assumptions about how gender norms manifest themselves. Rather than starting with the prior question, does testosterone have influence on gender norms, a lot of scientists, especially those who ignore the advancements made in the fields of sociology and psychology on the matter, will skip past the fundamentally important question and thus their findings will be skewed. If you assume automatically that testosterone has influence, then you will find data that suggests that testosterone has influence. The same exact problem can extend to evolutionary psychology in the same way. Evo-psych advocates ask an important question. How much does evolution influence the norms of our society and of our psychology? But they failed to ask the prior, more fundamental question, does evolution influence the norms of our society and our psychology? The answer to both the biological and evolutionary question on the matter is yes. Biology and evolution do influence us, but they do so to negligible effect. And even beyond that, it's overridden by both society's direct impact on itself and on the individual. And even further than that, the conclusions are made suspect by the people drawing these conclusions and the absurd amount of assumptions that they bring into their understanding that have already been well debunked by social scientists fields for quite some time now. One major false assumption about evolutionary psychology in particular is that because it's seen as stemming from evolutionary advantage to adhere to, for example, traditional roles of masculinity and femininity, it's seen as unproblematic and something that should not be altered. First of all, the evolutionary history of humanity does not in any way take top position when it comes to social configurations or moral frameworks. It's a piss-poor way of looking at the world in terms of ethics. Secondly, it's a piss-poor way of looking at the world even pragmatically speaking. In the hypothetical scenario in which evolutionary advantage is the cause for why we are where we are now, then evolutionary advantage is exactly as much of a reason for why we should try to change the status quo of tradition. There is no evolutionary advantage in a postmodern society to adhering to rigid, ancient rules for men and women. You can get your meat from the supermarket. You don't need to protect the women folk from being mauled to death by bears. We live in such an advanced society that in order to continue advancing, we should ideally see radical alterations to gender norms such that we can adapt to an ever-growing society instead of forcing a growing society to adapt to tradition. So the end result of evolutionary psychology is that it can, at best, explain how we got to where we are now, but it can do nothing to explain where we should go from here. That's the role of society. But I don't feel that Evo-psych even has that leg to stand on, because very obvious social assumptions that go into their reading of evolution history and biology show that they're working in the wrong realm altogether. Essentially, they're trying to play sociologists in a different field, and they are bad at it. Now, about that flaw in red pill rhetoric. They actually out themselves ideologically at about every turn when they try to describe their determinism perspective, because they apply a logic universally to humankind that's based on conservative beliefs in the United States that stem from around the time of the 1950s and continue to this day. If we look at what they discuss from an anthropological standpoint or a historical standpoint, then their statements immediately fall apart, but they rely on their audience not knowing any of this information. In particular, they're speaking to an audience with similar identities, sympathies, and backgrounds to themselves. They basically sell common tropes to the way that Western, specifically American society, constructs masculinity and femininity as though these are a universal constant of the human race, divorced from any historical or cultural variation. What's funniest about this, though, is that the source they pull from, the 1950s conservatism that they aspire to with their claims, isn't even validated by data from within Western and American society. Now let's turn back to the article The Misandry Bubble and look at their stance on gender. The primal nature of men and women. Genetic research has shown that before the modern era, 80% of women managed to reproduce, but only 40% of men did. The obvious conclusion from this is that a few top men had multiple wives, while the bottom 60% had no mating prospects at all. Women clearly did not mind sharing the top man with multiple other women, ultimately deciding that being one of 4 women sharing an alpha was still more preferable than having the undivided attention of a beta. Let us define the top 20% of men as measured by their attractiveness to women, as alpha males, while the 60% will be called beta males. The bottom 20% are not meaningful in this context. We'll have to cover the alpha and beta nonsense later, but this conclusion drawn about how men had multiple wives is like so obviously wrong that I almost feel a little bad explaining why. But here goes. People have affairs. People have children out of wedlock. People have spouses that die. In fact, part of the reason for the increase in divorce rates in the past 40 or 50 years is that before, the main thing that caused the end of the relationship was the husband passing away. There are a million reasons to conclude other factors than just the cool guys had a lot more wives. Research across gorillas, chimpanzees, and primitive human tribes show that men are promiscuous and polygamous. This is no surprise to a modern reader, but the research further shows that women are not monogamous, as is popularly assumed, but hypergamous. In other words, a woman may be attracted to only one man at any given time, but as the status and fortune of various men fluctuates, a woman's attention may shift from a declining man to an ascendant man. There is significant turnover in the ranks of alpha males, which women are acutely aware of. I'm sorry, but does the author not know that gorillas and chimpanzees are not men? Like, man means a human specifically. The link they provide for the argument that women are hypergamous according to research goes to a WordPress page, which itself leads to a book written by an actual neo-Nazi, who apparently has a PhD, though I can't for the life of me figure out what in. This is a great example of alluding to the vague notion that you have evidence without actually providing any. For another example of the sort of biotruth evo-psych rhetoric, let's look at an article from Reddit's The Red Pill forum titled The Evolutionary Biology Behind the Red Pill. We talk a lot at TRP about the differences between men and women. After a lifetime of blue pill conditioning, it is tempting to recoil from these ideas as horrific. One need only look at the reaction TRP gets on the rest of Reddit. However, there are strong theoretical and empirical scientific arguments for the truth of TRP. I hate to break it to you, but there just aren't any strong scientific arguments in favor of the red pill, and it's not horrifying, just tone-deaf and inaccurate. I managed to get briefly sucked in by the current feminist narrative. Even though as a scientist in a closely related field to the science behind TRP, I should have known better. I have made my confession in the chapel of TRP, and as penance for straying from the path, I offer you my wisdom on the science behind TRP as primer for those less scientifically inclined. Notice how the author doesn't say what field they were involved in as a quote-unquote scientist, nor what their work in the field was related to, nor any sort of reference through which we could figure this out for ourselves. At the core of the red pill is the idea of sexual strategy, i.e. the idea that men and women are best served by behaving in different ways when it comes to mating. This is not an idea limited to humans. According to evolutionary biology, the core principles should hold across all sexually reproducing species, and this is indeed what we find. Yeah, so I looked at the link that they provided, and first of all, the link doesn't discuss sexual strategy. It discusses sexual conflict, which is an evolutionary phenomenon, not a guideline for how to best approach mating. When I do look up sexual strategy, a lot of the results are red pill forum posts or pages, which isn't to say it's non-existent in academia, but it apparently isn't very common at a first glance. It's worth noting that the article doesn't actually discuss humans in any capacity. It talks about males and females in regards to evolution, which within that discipline is not discussing humans specifically, but rather animals generally. So it can't be used to immediately infer anything about men and women, which is not the same thing from a scientific perspective as male and female. Like, even if you're the kind of asshole who thinks that gender is directly tied to birth assignment, man and women still don't mean the same thing as male and female, because male/female refer to sex distinctions among any animals, and man and woman refer to specifically the context of human beings. This article is not talking about men and women distinctly, but males and females generally. Also, the article doesn't even argue that sexual conflict is the ideal for males and females, just that it's something that happens. And sexual conflict, according to the article, isn't even related to anything red pill. It just means that males and females in various species often come into conflict with one another through mating and parental behaviors. So basically, this is an example of someone pointing to academia and making it sound like it confirms what they're saying, when academia isn't actually talking about the same thing at all. And what was that last line again? According to evolutionary biology, the core principles should hold across all sexually reproducing species, and this is indeed what we find. Sorry, but you can't just say something that sweeping without a citation. Why would men and women be best served by different strategies? This basic dynamic is driven by one parent, in our case the female, having to invest more in each offspring. In humans, this is pronounced due to long pregnancies, nursing, and childhoods. Not only does the female have to expend a lot of energy on each child, more than the male, but she is also limited in how many offspring she can have. Therefore, the success of a female in passing on her genes is limited mainly by the amount of resources she can invest in her few children. Contrast this to the male. He is required to invest less in child. He could theoretically walk away after sex, but is probably better served by sticking around and providing some support. He can also have sex with a lot of women, thereby leaving a large number of children. Therefore, the success of a male in passing on his genes is limited by the availability of fertile women he can have sex with. To counter the point being made here, looking at a census report issued in March of 2017, women are actually slightly more likely to have children with multiple partners than men. All I'm saying is you can use similar reasoning to argue the inverse, and apparently in the US, the inverse is actually statistically more likely, meaning that at best, these arguments are conjecture, and at worst, contradict some of the data we have. This fundamental dichotomy was clearly articulated in this paper from 1972, although the idea originated even earlier than that, and has formed the basis of evolutionary psychology's study of sexual strategy in humans. Alright, so I checked the link and file not found. Oh well, I'm sure it was a great study that totally validated everything they said, or something. A fairly large body of evidence supports this dichotomy. Scientific studies have shown that across many different cultures, men are much more interested in looks, as peak fertility in women occurs in the early 20s, at exactly the same time as they are most attractive, while women value a man's ability to provide resources. Honestly, if I can be real for a moment, I think just about the hottest thing in any man, if I'm just being completely real, is his ability to provide resources. Feminist-influenced research has argued for the importance of cultural values in shaping these preferences, and to an extent that is true. What people answer on surveys will be influenced by what culture has told them they ought to find attractive. The proof is in the pudding, however. What do people actually look for when evaluating a mate? I just love the phrase, feminist-influenced research, like the author is trying to poison the well by saying, oh, this research over here, you won't want to look at that, it's feminist. And feminists are all evil, the proof is in the pudding. And honestly, all these articles are putting me in an early grade. You may remember the graphs from the upcoming book by one of the founders of OkCupid from data from the site. Men of all ages find women in the early 20s, i.e. peak fertility, most attractive. For women, the attractiveness of men varies with their own age. The failure of a man to provide in a relationship tends to lead to decreased attraction from a partner. Divorces are more likely when men are unemployed, a double whammy in her eyes, as his loss of resources is compounded by a blow to his confidence. OkCupid is not a very valuable source. Also, for the record, there are a million potential feminist arguments to be made about why men are more attracted to women who are younger, and a lot of it has to do with patriarchy. If I were to just take a guess, my first instinct would be to say that the media often shows younger women in lead and supporting roles in film and television and the like, while men are shown at varying ages even while their partners on screen are played by women. For example, actors like Tom Cruise in their 50s alongside wives played by women in their 20s. The sexist standards of Hollywood helps construct this illusion that women are only attractive when in their younger years, which might hypothetically cause a lot of men of varying ages to be attracted to only younger women, while women grow up to be a bit more realistic. And yes, this all is conjecture, but so is the article I'm responding to, which means best case scenario, the argument is moot. The highly invested sex is more selective. As we all know, females pick men, not the other way around, unless you are such a high-value man that you have a choice of females, but men will often mate with lower-value females while the inverse is rarely true. I honestly find the asymmetrical language here so entertaining, this idea that there's like two kinds of people, men and females. You can almost hear the bitterness seeping through clenched teeth as you read it. This dynamic is also predicted by evolutionary biology and is observed across a huge range of species, where males have to compete for mates by displays of resources, showing off their plumes or fighting each other. So the link they provide here links to a Wikipedia page on zoology. It only has one 3-sentence section about humans, and the section has no citations. It's not even a locked page. Literally, someone could have edited that in without any verification of the accuracy to this information. Also, like, zoology, as far as I know, doesn't actually study humans. Zoology studies wildlife. Also, zoology is not evolutionary biology. This attempt at a citation is just utterly bizarre to me. Note that I said the sex that invests more. In some species, the male does all the child rearing. Evolutionary biology predicts that in such species, the male should be selective. And so we find. I don't have much to say about this, but yes, sometimes the dynamic is reversed, which kind of throws the whole "this is your evolutionary purpose" thing out the window. Because if species are capable of having an inverted dynamic, then that means that survival is not inherently dependent on the dynamic that's being proposed. Again, culturalists may argue that society oppresses women and encourages them to be demure. There's an element of truth to this, certainly, but its effect is to lower the curve overall, rather than to change its shape. In other words, selectivity and promiscuity are separate. Women are still selective, but now they're more willing to sleep with the top males than ever before. Online dating provides still more data to support evolutionary biology in this idea. Women are more selective on Tinder and on OkCupid. So the end result is that the red pill's argument that women control the world is validated by sometimes male animals try to show off in order to get a chance of mating with the female. This was an utterly incoherent article, but I think it does a good job of demonstrating the facade of scienciness that the red pill community wants to portray itself as having, but also demonstrating how thin the actual backing is to maintain that facade. Just a basic clicking on the links shows that people like this are talking out of their ass. But for me, it's made all the more an issue by the fact that they often appeal to biological, or in their minds, natural explanations for men being shitty, because if it's natural, then it can't be problematic, or so they believe. So, thanks for watching. Sorry it took so long to get this video out. I had a very busy month this month, and so I didn't have time to be on my computer at all, let alone time to edit this together. Initially, when I made this video, I had intentions of covering a Coach Red Pill stream called How to Be a Man, and I actually had to cut that out because he took down that stream, and I felt like it'd be in poor taste to be addressing arguments that are not even available to be seen in their entirety. So, yeah, that ended up saving a lot of time on this video. So yeah, thanks for watching, and if you'd like to donate to my Patreon, you're free to do that. The link's in the description and all that. And yeah, I hope to have the next part out a lot sooner than this part. See ya.